and Jesse Kellerman are a father and son, New York Times bestselling writing team who pen one extraordinary book after another. Their latest thriller, The Burning, will be released on September the 21st, so make sure to pre-order it. Jonathan, Jesse, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Pleasure to be
Thanks for
here.
having us.
So, your lead character in The Burning is Clay Edison, who's a coroner. So I'd love to ask you, how much research have you done to familiarize yourself with Coroner? It's fascinating work. And also, can you share a fascinating tidbit you learned from your research?
It's an interesting question because initially when we conceived it, I had thought of the coroner the way it is in LA, and no one had ever done a book with a coroner's investigator, and I had everything all planned out, and I'd been to the crypt here many times. And then we decided to set it up north, and Jesse informed me it was totally different. So
The system up here in Alameda County, which is where the series is set, is a little bit different. There's no uniformity in how death investigation is done from place to place. There's not even uniformity in what those people are called. They're called different things in different places. Up here in Alameda County, which serves the East Bay, the east of San Francisco Bay Area, they're all deputy sheriffs. So they're all peace officers, and working at the coroners as a deputy coroner is one duty station of many that the sheriff's office serves. The sheriff's office here is very, very large. They serve a very large area, and they do all the things that you expect the sheriff's office to do. Plus, they do the airport security at the airport at Oakland. They do the coroner. So that's different from the way it is in many other places in Los Angeles where they're civilians. It used to be that they were civilians as well up here, but that started changing over about a decade ago, right before we started writing the series. So when I first went down to the office, to the morgue, to get to know them, there were still some people there who were civilians who had been grandfathered in. Most of those people, I believe, have since retired. What would be one? Everything about it is fascinating. Most of the on the ground research has been done up here because this is where it's set, and I've done a lot of hanging out and being a fly on the wall at the ACSO Coroners Bureau. And about 5 minutes after I got there on my very first visit, they said, "We're going. We have an overdose," and they took me. In the van to Union City to a cheap motel where an unfortunate individual had died of a heroin overdose. So every single thing that I've experienced hanging out with them, and I spent many hours with them at this point, has been new and interesting to me. I guess from the perspective of a writer, one of the most interesting things is that their job is really twofold. They have an investigative side, wherein they're tasked with figuring out, okay, how did this person die? What was the manner of this person's death? Which is distinct from the cause of their death, right? That's something that maybe we should elaborate on. We can talk about that in a little bit. So that's one half of their job, and that's sort of the cop side of their job. The other half of their job is almost like they have to play almost the role of a therapist, because they're the ones who are tasked with in notifying people that their loved ones have died, and that is a very emotionally taxing job. So, here's one tidbit that I learned when I was there, which is that it's the only duty station in the sheriff's office where if you say, I can't do this, it's too difficult for me, they transfer you out the next day. There's no waiting period, and that's not true for the SWAT team. That's not true for the search and rescue team. That's not true for airport security, jobs where there's ostensibly a much greater physical danger. Here, the emotional stress is extremely high. And if you say, I'm not fit for this, they ship you out of there immediately.
Well, the part of the job that homicide cops will tell you that they really find the most difficult is notification. Telling a family, you're ruining someone's life. You're showing up and telling them the worst news they've ever heard. It's a very, very tough thing to do. I worked in pediatric oncology as a psychologist for about a decade at Children's Hospital, and you deal with that kind of stuff, but we were trained to do it. And even with that, it's extremely difficult. So very tough.
They don't get any training.
No training, just get your feet wet and do it.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about doing the research here is we had never had any problem gaining access to other police departments. My wife and I wrote a couple of novellas together, Faye Kellerman, the famous Faye Kellerman, and we have been to, we got access to the LA coroners, we got access to Nashville and everywhere. Even the Berkeley cops were very good. Getting access to the Oakland Sheriff's Department was really, they were very gun shy. I think because they'd had some community relations issues. And I just had to keep writing and sending them free books, which they claimed they couldn't take, but we never got them back. And just really emphasizing that we don't write an expose. We're not out here to trash the police. We're out to tell it the way it is and write a page-turning thriller. And finally, once Jesse got in, they were great. And I think now he has buddies, so
Yeah, once those relationships are established, they become friendships, and so I am lucky to be able to count a number of those people as friends.
That's amazing. We've had on a lot of co-authors, but we never had on, to the best of my knowledge, a father-son writing team. So I want to know: is it easier being co-authors when you're a father-son team, and or is that more difficult? And then when you guys really can't agree on something, who gets the final say?
It's going to sound sugar-coated. For us, it's been fantastic. Part of it is, we didn't start doing it till both of us had bestsellers. So Jesse was already a highly accomplished writer. He won a playwriting award. He was a bestseller, and I wrote a bunch of books. And we kind of fell into it by accident. It wasn't a plan. I had started a book, and I'd done about 100 pages, and I dropped it because it was so much work, and I was writing 2 other books. And Jesse happened to be down here visiting with his family, and he said, "What's that?" And he looked at it, and he says, "Well, maybe we could do it together." I said, "Hey, that'll be fun." And we did, and we got it published. It was a bestseller, and we did another one, and we kept doing it. And for us, it's been easier. What makes it look? I used to play in a band. When you play in a band, you want to make sure the guys you're playing with have what I call good chops. They have talent. If you're playing with a bad musician, that's horrible. Jesse is he's a brilliant writer, so it just makes it easier. I don't think we've really disagreed. Have we disagreed on anything?
I don't think so. I mean, we definitely discuss things. We definitely go back and forth about things, but I think both of us are bringing to the collaboration. There's a few things at play here. The first is that, and I've said this before, that I think we both recognize that our relationship both predates and will postdate the collaboration.
Yeah.
So the relationship is much more important. If I felt like the collaboration was becoming a source of stress and difficulty in our personal relationship, I'd stop the collaboration. So far, that hasn't happened. We've gotten along really well. I also think that we both come to the page with the desire to create the best book and write the best story that we can. We're not there to sort of prove anything about ourselves, either to the world or to each other. And that's, I give my dad a ton of credit in that. It is true that, yes, we both had careers prior to this, but he makes it sound like we had the same kind of career. I started doing this a lot later than he did. So, I had 5 books where he had 35 books before. So I think it would be very easy for my dad to say, well, I have a veto here, and he's never done that. He's always that wouldn't be fun. The point of collaboration is, like when you're collaborating with other musicians and jamming with other musicians, you get a tremendous amount of gratification from hearing what they do and how what they do reflects what you do, and you allow what they do to influence what you do next. And that's part of the joy and the fun. I don't think either of us look at this the same way as we do our own personal work.
Exactly.
There we have a sense of ownership, and that's our own individual domains. But this is an entirely different process. It's really driven by a desire to see what the other person can do.
You have to come in with a different mindset of what collaboration is. And both of us had a lot of experience with collaboration. First of all, Jesse came from a background of theater and directing, acting, playwriting, where that's by nature a collaborative venture. I was a I wrote for the UCLA paper and I was cartoonist for the UCLA paper and I had a partner for 4 years. So I was used to that. And Faye and I collaborated on a few books. And so you just go in with the mindset of this is a collaboration. We're going to have fun with that. And what Faye and I learned is she always joked that when she got into a tough spot, she would say, your turn. She would just punt and vice versa. So in some sense, it's easier. But so far, we've written what, 5, 6 books together. We really haven't had a problem. In fact, it's been a lot of fun. But I have to give my son credit. I mean, the reason is he's such a great writer. So it's like, okay, why is my name even on this? This is perfect, you know. But then I put my own name into it. You know?
I think you've earned your stripes for sure. So Jonathan, we talked about your work in pediatric cancer, which you know is really profound. You meet with people, you know, the most intense time of their life.
Right.
You know, with that kind of position and job, do you feel that your insights from that affect your emotions when you write, like in the sense that your ability to put that into your characters?
Oh yeah, I mean, my work as a psychologist definitely informed my novels, especially the Alex Delaware novels, because he's a psychologist. I would, of course, never write about a real patient because of confidentiality. So I learned early on it made me a better writer. I had to make stuff up. What it did give me was a sense of verisimilitude. So if I was writing about a certain type of a therapy scene or a certain type of an emotional scene, I had experienced it in a way that many writers hadn't. It gave me a distinct advantage, I thought. So yeah, I mean, it's just everything you do in life informs your books. And for 5 years, I did both jobs. I had a full-time practice in child clinical psych and wrote 5 best-selling novels. And then after a while, I said, something's got to give. You know, my publisher was saying we have to tour you. Back in the days when we did book tours, and I couldn't leave my patients. So I said, I've had 5 bestsellers. Let me give this writing gig a chance. And fortunately, it worked out. But I still consider myself a psychologist. I'm still very fond of the field. I respect it and respect psychologists. One of the great things by giving the keynote in Toronto was meeting all these psychologists who were fantastic. And they were multi-generational. There were a lot where the grandparents, parents, and children had all become shrinks. And 2 of Jesse Sibbs are licensed, very able clinical psychologists. So it seems to be that kind of a
That's amazing. How did you balance the, you know, sort of your pediatric work with writing? Did you write at night or?
Yeah, I wrote at night. Well, I was a struggling writer for many years. You know, I won a writing award in college, and then it took me 13 years to get published. So over the 13 years, I wrote 9 or 10 novels and never got published. And my writing time was 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. in my garage. And then after, even after I got published, we still didn't have room in the house, so I kept doing that for a while until we bought a new house, and I got this beautiful office you see behind you. But yeah, it was a tough gig. But I was in my 30s. Now I'm 72, so I don't think I'd have the energy to do it now.
Well, Kim's right. I think the writing thing really did work out, and it kind of segues perfectly into my question for you, Jesse. So obviously, not just your father, but both your parents are really successful, famous authors. I believe you went to Harvard to study psychology at one point. As your dad mentioned, you're a successful playwright. So when was it that you decided that you wanted to be a novelist as well? And is it easier or harder to go down that road when your parents are both such successful novelists in their own right?
Well, so the thing about becoming a novelist is you don't make that decision. Somebody else makes that decision for you when they decide to publish your book and make it your job. Most of us were writers long before we were published authors. It's rare that you just make that decision and walk into a publishing contract. So I started writing. I, like my father, wrote habitually, almost compulsively from a very young age. I was dictating stories to him when I was 3 or 4 years old before I could actually take a pen and write anything. And I think it's interesting to note before he was actually published, like that was just sort of the modality of how our family communicated through stories. We're just a narrative driven bunch of people. And I wrote throughout grade school, throughout high school, throughout college.
Tell them about your first book.
My first book, which I dictated to my dad when I was 3.5 or something like that, was called Apple of Danger. I came to my dad. I said, I have a novel, or I don't think I said novel. I said, I have a story. Can I tell you? And I dictated it to him. He wrote it down, and he stapled it. They still have it. They have it in a file somewhere. And there was this. It was a series. It was Apple of Danger, Pear of Danger, Cherry of Danger, Orange of Danger. So I had clearly a commercial sensibility even back then. But the drive was always there, even though it took different forms. As you mentioned, I was a playwright. That's what I concentrated on primarily when I was in college, and then in grad school, I went to grad school for playwriting. And it wasn't until I wrote several failed novels before I sold my first novel, which was Sunstroke. I don't know that there was ever a point at which I made a decision. There was definitely a point at which I decided to try this as an adult and see if it would work out. But I had a very, very robust backup plan. When I sold my first novel, I was already actually on the path to go to law school. I had been accepted to law school. I was about to start law school that fall.
Going back to Harvard.
I sold the book that June. So I was like ready to go start to become a 1L. And I called the admissions office and I said, I'm not coming. You can give the spot to someone else. And there was a long pause, and they said, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want to do it?" I said, "Yes, I have an alternative." And there was another pause, and they said, "You can't get your deposit back." I said, "It's okay. You can consider that a donation. That's fine. I'd rather do this." In terms of whether it was easier or harder, I mean, it's both. The answer is both. Here are the ways in which it was easier. I had models all throughout my childhood of how you could write professionally and make that a job. I had 2 working writers in the house who showed me what it took to be a professional novelist. And it's not necessarily the things that you would think. It wasn't craft related issues. It was job and discipline related issues. I saw them go to work every day. I saw them sit down and shut the door, and I could hear them typing every single day, whether they were in the mood or not, and whether they felt particularly creative that day. They were in the chair in front of the computer typing every day because that was their job. So that was a very, very important lesson and a great model. I also had what I think a lot of people don't have, which is an idea that this was a job, that you could even do this as a job. Because I think a lot of writers by nature who are not surrounded by other writers, they just do this and they don't know why they do it. And it's no different from somebody who likes to knit or somebody who likes to, who has some other hobby. They don't look at this and say, oh, this is a viable career. Whereas I could look and say, oh, this is a viable, here's how you make this into a career. In terms of craft and those things, I would say that my parents interfered minimally with me as a writer. They were certainly encouraging when I brought them something to read, but they didn't edit what I wrote. They didn't try to push me in one direction. They didn't say when I was writing plays, you can't make a living writing plays, you should try something else. I had to figure that out on my own. So there was a lot of encouragement, but it was general encouragement, and it was the same kind of encouragement I suspect I would have gotten if I had become a psychologist or a lawyer or a physician. My parents are very supportive, encouraging people. So those are all things that made it really, 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 really easy for me to say, this is something I can do. Has it made it hard? I mean, that would be a little ungrateful to describe it as hard. I'm not going to say it's hard. I will say that sometimes people bring preconceived notions of who I am and what my writing should be based on having read many Jonathan Kellerman and or many Faye Kellerman novels. And sometimes people are surprised when my books are different. I don't know why it should be a surprise. I mean, when people ask me that, they say to me, you're so different, you're writing so different from your parents. I say, well, are you exactly like your parents? And usually people, that's enough for them to say, oh, you know what, you're right. I'm not exactly like my parents. I also think that there's probably a very small, but real percentage of the population who perceives the fact that I've been able to do this as somehow a function of nepotism or a sop to my dad. And I got more of that in the beginning. I got weird emails in the beginning because I was young. That sort of died away as people have lost interest. It's not that interesting anymore because now I've been doing this for 20 years. Um, I guess in that sense, there's something maybe not to overcome, but there's something that I bring with me to the page that people are always going to look at when they see the name Kellerman. But I could have chosen to write under a different. I could have chosen to go around that, and I know writers who are kids of writers who have gone that route and used a different surname. But this is who I am. I'm proud of who I am. I love my parents. I love my family and my surname, and I'm not, I guess, sort of hung up on the idea that I need to artificially differentiate myself from them in some way. The books are the books, and you can read them, and you'll either appreciate them as for what they are or not.
The irony is a little nepotism would have been welcome. Why
Yeah.
not? Everyone else has it. And what appalled me and pissed me off to no end was it worked against Jesse. This is the truth. Like my publisher, which was Random House, and Face publisher, which was HarperCollins, huge publishers, really didn't want to read his book because they said, well, what if we don't like it? You will get mad at us. I said, I'm getting
Right.
mad at you that you don't want to read it. But, they were just stupid about it. So he went to Putnam and he got his own deal. And I remember him coming to me. He said, Dad, I don't have to go to Harvard Law School. I said, a lot of people would be happy to go to Harvard Law School, but good for you. So we are not controlling parents, both of us. It's not like it wasn't havoc. We ran a structured house. If Faye, one time we did an interview with the LA Times and they referred to her running the house like a Rolls Royce clock. She's very organized, but we didn't control the kids. Like parents go crazy when their kids apply to college. We didn't do that. They all applied to college. They all applied early to different colleges. They all got in. We didn't really care. We knew they were smart, and we're more concerned they grew up as good people and happy people. And they all married wonderful people. So we're very, very happy about it all. It's not like a disgustingly happy family. Of course, we have strong personalities, but for the most part, we get along very, very well. And Jesse is, very loved and admired by his three younger sisters. They really look up to him, and they all get along. They're it's a good bunch.
Well, it sure sounds like you have your priorities right. So I
Yeah.
like, and no regrets on the law school.
You ever
No,
regrets?
absolutely, absolutely not.
Yeah,
Absolutely not.
he
Yeah.
he
I
would
mean,
be writing, but it would be boring stuff.
I mean, the thing is, like, I truly believe that if I had gone to law school, I'd be a lawyer and I'd be a happy lawyer. Like,
Yeah.
that's really, it's what any situation is what you make. I consider myself very, very, very fortunate and very privileged that I get to do this. But I think one of the things that, and I think my father feels the same way about this, is like I think like most things that people do are interesting on some level. Like I love talking to people and finding out what it is they do, and finding out how their jobs work. That's interesting to me, and it's part of the curiosity of being a writer, that you're always seeking to understand more about the world. So I think like I'm not going to claim I'd be a happy factory cog. I'm not sure that would have been the right career for me, but I could easily have gone many other paths.
I loved being a psychologist, which is why I did both for several years. I really didn't want to give it up, and just became too much. So I had to make a choice. The other thing about collaboration, which I was thinking about, is the development of voice. Every writer has a voice, and I have a voice, and Jesse has a voice. So the key is to create a synthesis. And the first book we did together was called The Golem of Hollywood. And I gave it to Stephen King, and he loved it. He freaked out, and he wrote me he's a lovely guy. He wrote me an email. He says, John, I know your voice, and I know Jesse's voice. You have created a new voice. Nicest thing he could have said. So we're really happy about that.
That's high praise.
Yeah, it's great.
And speaking of praise, you both had an incredible success and accolades. And I'd love to ask you both, what is the proudest moment of your career so far?
Oh wow, you want to go first?
Proudest moment was getting published, because I had labored for 13 years of abject failure. And I used to, every time I got a rejection slip, and they were mean, some of them. I mean, they were like, you're in the wrong business. I mean, it wasn't just, we don't want this book. It was F you, basically. And, and after a while, you start to doubt yourself. You say, I think I'm pretty good at this, but maybe I'm being psychotic. Maybe I should play golf instead of sitting here and so when I finally got published, even though the advance was very small, and I remember it was so little money, came out to $3 an hour to write When the Bow Breaks. I said I could, but I was doing very well as a psychologist, very successful in practice. We had a big practice. I had people working for me. We had 3 offices. We're doing great. And I remember saying, "Gee whiz, this is so little money. Maybe I can afford to do another one in a few years." It just didn't pay, and then it became a bestseller. So that I remember my agent calls me up. You know, shrinks have this 15-minute time where we're charting in between patients, and he's calling from New York City. "John, are you sitting down? You're on the list." I go, "What list is that?" He goes, "The New York Times bestsellers." I go, "Is that a big deal? Because I'm in LA. I don't read the New York Times." And he goes, "Yeah, you moron," basically. And so I was pretty freaked out by the whole thing. I said, "Oh, okay, so maybe I'll do another one." Bestseller. I mean, so I don't understand why I don't write commercially. I just have been very lucky that there's a segment of people who seem to like what I do. So it's been a dream. It's been a dream. I'm very, very happy about it. You know, people want to hear about the depressed writer. It's not me. Not me. I'm a happy writer.
I think for me, um, and I don't mean to sound glib about this, but I think for me, my proudest moment is whatever thing I'm working on at that exact moment. And what I mean by that is I still get a tremendous amount of pleasure and excitement putting together a sentence in a way that makes sense, in a way that feels right. And there's real moment to moment satisfaction, um, even though it can be frustrating. Sometimes you have to struggle through 4 or 5 or 10 or 20 iterations of that sentence until it clicks into the correct position. But that is what gives me pride. It's not any sort of external. I mean, I think when you're young and you're starting out, you really because you're operating in a vacuum. So you crave outside positive, especially positive, any sort of feedback, um, because you've been doing this so long in the dark, and so to feel like anybody else is paying attention is very gratifying. So you get reviews or you get award nominations, and those are great. 20 years on, I gotta say, like, that's not what I wake up in the morning hoping for. The burning, which is out in a couple of weeks, like, we've been getting notices, and they've been really good notices so far.
Right.
So which is great, and but I'm mostly excited because I feel like that gives the publicist something to work with, right? It doesn't affect how I feel about that day's writing, because we're working on the next book, So I don't sit down, to work on the next 2 pages and say, today Booklist thought I did a great job. So I'm going to write really well today because of what Booklist. I mean, it's great. Maybe it's like a little shot in the arm, but the pride comes from the craft itself. And I think that's something that, I try to convey to right people who are working on breaking into the biz. The questions we tend to get are, how do I get an agent? How do I get published? And it's all the end product stuff. And I understand why people think that way. It's very, very, very concrete, and it's easy to focus on, and it feels validating to say somebody will publish my book. But in my view, it's really cart before the horse, and you have to really enjoy the process of crafting the novel itself and take pride in that. And that will be reflected in the writing. And ultimately, that's really the only control you have over your situation. So I try to feel that every day when I sit down. I'm so lucky I get to do this job. I'm so fortunate that I have something else I'd like to say. I feel grateful that I sit down and I can reach for the words and they're still there. All of those things are the things that infuse my writing career with pride.
It's it's the best job in the world, I think. I joke it beats honest labor, but it is labor. It's strenuous in the sense that while I enjoy it, I'm tired when I finish. I have to take a break. 3, 4 hours of writing feels like 8 or 9 hours of something else because your attention is so intensely focused. I just think it's a great job. I like the flexibility that I have, but it's a kind of job because of the flexibility that is not suited to an undisciplined person.
True.
If you're a disciplined person, and all the successful writers that we know who've been doing this for a while share one thing in common. They treat it like a job. As Jesse said, they go into the office. You don't puff yourself up. You're lucky. You're not better than anybody else. You're just a person who's lucky enough, like an athlete, to be able to do something a lot of people can't do. So keep practicing your free throws and work hard at it. And it's still hard. Every book that I write, I've written about 60 books, every book that I write is tougher than the previous one because how do you stay original, especially within the confines of a series? So Graham Greene said that once a writer turns 60, the only reason to write is fun or money, hopefully both. And I'm way past that. So I'm having fun, and that's why I keep doing it.
So here's a question for both you, and it kind of harps back to what Jesse was saying about. You said something there in your answer, Jesse. You said, "I'm thankful I still have something to say." So I want to ask you a little bit about that. We've talked about the writing process a little bit. How do you know when you have an idea that's novel worthy, and not just in your co-authored projects, but your individual projects as well? I think a lot of people have intriguing ideas or concepts. How do you know when you really landed on something that you just have to write about, though?
You want to take that?
Well, I would say that it's different in our collaborative process than it is for me in my individual work. So I'll just speak about sort of for a moment how individually I know that I've landed on something. Because you have ideas all the time, right? Ideas are always popping in your head. Like your subconscious is always churning and presenting ideas. There are a couple signs to me that indicate that something is worth taking a closer look at and paying attention to. The first is that I try to forget about it, but I can't. I try to let the idea go, but it's still coming back to me. It's coming back to me a week later, a month later, 6 months, a year later. I'm waking up and I'm thinking about it. That's a flag that, okay, this is something that maybe you should be paying attention to. That's sign number one. I would say that, so there are very few novels that are built on a single idea, right? So whatever that original germ is, it doesn't matter how novel a concept is, that's never going to be enough to carry a whole novel. A good idea is one that when you start to explore it, opens up other ideas, more ideas, and the tree branches out very, very rapidly. You can feel new plot lines sort of coming into existence. You can feel characters presenting themselves. You can see images presenting themselves, and that's not true for every idea. Sometimes you get an idea, and it's like it's a one-liner. It's okay. Wouldn't that be a funny idea? If, but it doesn't suggest anything beyond itself. And so, to a certain extent, you have to start writing it to see if it's going to lend itself to become a whole novel. In our collaborative work, I keep a file of ideas, those sort of like one simple line, one line premises. My dad has a similar thing, and when it's time for us to move on to the next book, we sort of say, okay, what do you got? What do you got? Or do any of these things fit together? How do they fit together with the previous novels? Because the Clay series moves in real time, right? Each book carries us into the next book, and there are episodes from previous novels that bleed into the current novel, and it's through that sort of back and forth talking that we start to get excited about. You can see what ideas start to excite us because we have a lot to say on the subject. So it's a little bit different for the solo work. It's a question of me, in conversation with my subconscious. With my dad, I'm in conversation with him.
There are premise-driven writers. The late Michael Crichton comes to mind. Perhaps if I was a premise-driven novelist, I would have a ride at Universal Studios like Jurassic Park. But I'm not. And that's one of the reasons that my books haven't been adapted to movies. Movies and TV shows are premise driven. You have to be able to sum them up in a sentence. And most of my books, I have occasionally taken a premise. I wrote a book called Devil's Waltz many years ago about Munchausen by proxy, which no one had ever written about. No one. I sent it to my editor, and she said, "This is bizarre," and doctors didn't know. But once again, it wasn't about it. It was about what Munchausen by proxy did to this family. Because of my work, I tend to write about family psychopathology and basically the past coming back to haunt the present. So it just requires a lot of thought. And when I write my own novels, it's about a year-long process, about half of which is spent thinking and outlining and jotting down notes, and the other half is writing it once that's done. As Jesse mentioned, I have voluminous files because when I turn a certain age, I lost my short-term memory, and I have, I would say, plot lines for about 80 novels, but I'll never have time to write all of them, but they're there. But often I just think of something new. It can be a walking down the street and hearing someone say something. It could be seeing something bizarre. It's never the headline on page 1 or 2. If you're going to look at a newspaper, it's going to be what's on page 43 in a small town newspaper. The obscure stuff, the bizarre stuff, the stuff that's not in the public eye. But generally, the problem is not getting the ideas. Everyone says, "Oh, I have an idea." And we say, "Write it up." The key is taking an idea and transforming it into a novel. And what we have to offer that movies and TV don't, for all their virtues, is depth. Depth. Film is impressionistic. You do it with visuals. You do it with suggestion. In a novel, you can go into depth in a way that you can't in any other art form, except possibly writing a symphony.
Couldn't agree more. So touching on the depth, you guys both have, history of working and studying psychology. So when you create characters, whether it's Clay or other characters, do you spend time talking to each other about the character's background and their personalities? Can you walk us through how that process works for you?
Well, I especially do it in the collaborative books because I thought I was a perfectionist till I started collaborating with Jess, who he comes from that background. He needs to know everything about every character, including what they ate for breakfast when they were 6. So we know our characters and we do discuss motivation. I tend in my own novels to wing it a little bit more. Would you say that's true?
That is an accurate description of the different one of the differences in our process. Yeah, we've obviously. I mean, Clay. This book that is coming out. This is the 4th novel in the series, and in the first 3 novels, we've learned quite a bit about him and his family, his relationship with his brother, who is an ex-con. We've seen him go from being a single guy to a guy with a girlfriend to a married guy with kids, and so in the process of taking him through from stage to stage, we've both drawn on previous biography as well as we've created his biography in real time. We keep a running time. I have a running timeline on my computer of all the events in his life from the first 3 novels. The events, both of the novels themselves, as well as things that are referred to, because there's simply too much to keep track of at this point. His birthday, his wife's birthday, his brother's birthday, all of that stuff. The day his brother went to jail, the day his brother got out of jail, that kind of thing. But that so one of I think one of the most important lessons I learned as a young writer is that all that stuff, the background and backstory. I think when you're first starting out, there's a tendency to front load your novels with that information. Here is a complete biographical sketch of the character, so you understand exactly who this person is, and now there's a story. But that's not the approach that ends up being the most effective or B, the most graceful. Backstory is actually like a gift. You get to parcel it out slowly in bits and pieces over the course of and that in some way becomes a secondary story that moves throughout the course of these novels. Each novel has a mystery at its core, and it also has in the background whatever is happening in Clay's life. And so we get to interweave all of that stuff. So we have a lot of it sort of held back in reserve. But one of the joys is that sometimes we discover new things about him as we write. There's this balance we're trying to strike always as writers between order and spontaneity. Without some form of order, you run the risk of just going off the rails completely and losing the thread of your story. But without being open to good ideas as you are writing, you're going to miss a lot of good ideas. There's no guarantee that the 6 weeks or 12 weeks that you spend outlining a year are the most creative weeks of the year. You're going to get good ideas at various points. So to being open to those ideas and not afraid that they're going to derail your well-ordered story is very, very important.
One thing Jesse has a gift for that I think he is more in tune with his mother. I have learned writing with Jesse, he really has a gift for depicting family life. And Faye was great at that. That's not something I am particularly good at or do very often. I think because of my background in psychology, I'm much more oriented toward writing about strangeness and pathology. And I don't think I've ever written about a happy family or a normal family scene in 40 years. I write about weird stuff. But Jesse has a way, and so does Faye, of really depicting the normal vicissitudes of family life. And I admire it greatly because it's something I'm not very good at.
Well, here's a quick one for both of you. What one piece of advice would you give an aspiring author just setting out to write their first manuscript?
Boy, just write. I mean, it's, once again, be curious. Be curious. I find introspection the greatest enemy of creativity. Don't spend a lot of time thinking about yourself, navel gazing. Just go in and do the damn job and treat it professionally. I can always tell who was serious. If people would come up to me and say, I want to be a writer, I knew that it was going to happen, because what they were interested in was the depictions of writers that they saw in movies, which is some guy sitting with his feet up with a laptop overlooking a lake and having a martini and a good looking chick in a bikini, and it's glamorous, blah, 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 blah. When they come up and say, either I love to write or I don't like it, but I'm driven to do it. Either way, that's serious. So you really don't have to tell a person, as Jesse mentioned, they are always putting the cart before the horse. So you always see people talking about how do I promote? Because especially this day and age of influencers on the internet, and people can make so much money doing nothing. There's a desire to do that. But if you're serious about being a novel, I also gave a keynote at USC, my alma mater, and I said, I hope you guys go out and get real jobs, not internet influencer jobs. And I got big applause for that. So we have to move towards substance. It's a very tough job. It's like learning to play piano. You have to practice a lot, and you have to just sit down and do it, right? I mean, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I know. I mean, what I would say is what I said before. Enjoy the process itself, because without that, you're wasting your time. There's no guarantee that this is ever going to be remunerative. The only guarantee is that if you are enjoying it, it will be remunerative for your soul. So I can't emphasize that enough. It's something that you have to want to do. You want, as my dad said, right? The verb is more important than the noun. The process of I like to write is more important than I want to be a writer.
Yeah, because being a writer, what does it really mean? I have a great life, but I don't walk around saying I'm a writer. I'm a dad. I'm a grandpa. People would ask Jesse, what was it like growing up in your family? Thinking we sat around the table and talked about plot. No, we talked about normal stuff that families talk about. We didn't get, right? I mean, we didn't really talk about work. It was just about the kids. Normal stuff.
Well, that's excellent advice, and I couldn't agree more, because I think if you don't love writing, it's a very hard job. So you really have to want to do it to, definitely follow up. So before we let you gentlemen go, can you take us a little bit deeper into the plot of The Burning, and what should readers expect with this one?
Well, I'll let you get into in terms of what to expect. If you read the other Clay Edison novels, this one is page-turning, action-packed book. It takes Clay in a whole different direction because of family.
Yeah. So without giving too much away, if you're familiar with the first three books, you know that Clay has this difficult relationship with his older brother, Luke, who is, as I mentioned, an ex-convict. went to prison for getting into for driving drunk and killing somebody. And at the very beginning, I won't give away too much by telling you that the very beginning of the novel, Clay is called to the scene of a homicide. And at that homicide, he discovers a link to his brother. So this book is different from the previous books in that the first three books were really books about the past. They were books where Clay, in his role as a deputy coroner, was given a mystery about somebody who had died, and then had to go backward to try and determine the truth and the facts about that person's life and death. This book, as my dad said, is really like a ticking clock kind of book. It's by design. We wanted to see, okay, what happens when we take this guy who has established himself as a very sort of thoughtful, compassionate, funny guy who is capable of seeing through the surface of things to understand the family psychopathology underlying tragedy. What if we put him in a pressure cooker? What if we really, really turn the heat up on him in this book? And so that's what we wanted to do here. And for that reason, both the plot as well as the background, the setting of the book, it takes place, unlike the first three books, which take place over a span of 6 months or 8 months or a year. This book takes place in just a few days, and it's really a minute by minute account of those few days. And the backdrop is that California is suffering a catastrophic series of wildfires and power outages, which was the background we've gone through. In the background when we were writing this, it was last year, so that it ratchets up the tension even more, because there's just, in addition to all the regular hurdles he has to face, he has the hurdle of things of a city that's not functioning correctly. So it's a stressful book in the best way. I think for our readers, I hope it'll be an interesting and exciting sort of new angle on who he is and a new revelation to his character.
Well, the reviews have been great, so I think people do appreciate it. We did set out, we discussed this. We do a lot of discussing before we start the book. We wanted to write an environmental novel, not in the sense of making a political statement, just to reflect some of what was going on in California. I know we both went through, I think Jesse had it rougher, but a few years ago, Faye and I have a house on the beach, and it was damaged in a fire, and it was we evacuated Malibu and sat for 6 hours and could have died had the winds shifted. It was quite an experience. The little dog you see who just walked into the room was with us, and she behaved herself perfectly. But it was just Faye and myself and Colette, the fifth child who doesn't talk back, evacuating Malibu, and we went through quite a hellish experience. And then Jesse living up north, the fires and the pollution and little kids, so we just decided to try and depict it without editorializing.
Yeah.
Well, The Burning, in stores everywhere, September 21st. We hope everyone watching runs out and grabs a copy as soon as it releases. And guys, thank you so much for joining us today on Thriller Talk.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
Loved having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.